The Orlando's news and talk. Remember that the answers given on this show do not constitute legal advice and do not create an attorney-client relationship. For legal advice, you can call the office here anytime at 1-800-DeWitt-LAW, or you can interact with the show just like you see. We have some great emails and questions today. Send your question to ask@dewittlaw.com, or you can also call and leave a voicemail at 407-53-MOSES. Every Sunday morning, 10 a.m., you'll learn how Florida's legal issues affect you with your host, Mo DeWitt of the DeWitt Law Firm. Mo will answer your questions to discuss the latest legal issues affecting the citizens of Central Florida. My name is Jay Edwards here with Mo DeWitt. And Mo, let's jump right in because I know a lot of people are trying to recover after Hurricane Ian.
Yeah, about a little over a week out from the storm now.
Yeah, and this is when people come out looking to do people wrong, unfortunately, take advantage of them in their, in a time of need.
Yeah, I mean, if you've lived in Florida long enough, you've seen it or heard the stories of it if you haven't seen it firsthand. But yeah, anytime there's storms, there's always somebody who's trying to profit off of them, unfortunately.
Of course.
And sometimes those individuals are a bit unscrupulous. So.
Right. So let's start, say like with the roof, somebody comes by a roof or a tree company, they see that you've got some damage or whatever, or they see that you've got a tree down and they want to offer to chainsaw it up and get it out of there for you so you don't have to wait for the county to do it. Can you trust those kinds of people, or what kind of questions should we be asking them?
So, in general, you just want to do your research on anyone you're hiring, right? So if you're going in for surgery or if you are hiring someone to remodel your kitchen, you would check their reviews. If you're smart, you would ask them for their contractor's license, make sure they're licensed in the state of Florida, make sure they're insured in case they mess something up. Those are the kinds of things that we should be doing with these contractors or with anyone you're hiring related to the storm as well. Just, a lot of times people get into a situation where, hey, I really want to get this tree out of here. This guy carrying a chainsaw down the street seems like a nice guy. I'll ask him to chop it up.
$200 cash. I'll do it right now.
Yeah. And sometimes that works out just fine. Other times I've had cases where, they hire some guy who tries to climb up in the tree to cut down the limb. And then he falls. And now he's suing the homeowner because he got injured on their property.
Man,
it becomes a whole mess and a headache. And obviously he wasn't insured, didn't have his own insurance to cover the damage that, he caused to himself. And in that case, also to the property. Mm-hmm. So you just want to be careful. You want to do your due diligence. I know we're in a hurry to all kind of get back to normal, get things restored, get things cleaned up. But especially with, all this flood damage we saw throughout Central Florida, it's going to take a long time to get that cleaned up.
For sure.
And, a lot of people are not going to have insurance to cover that too. So you really want to make sure that you're paying attention to what they're going to charge you, that how much it's going to cost up front. What are the payment terms? How much do you have to put down? So, a lot of people may be willing to come out right away and they want you to sign a bunch of paperwork, but make sure you know what you're signing before you get yourself into the situation where now you have to pay tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars out of pocket to do the restoration because you don't have flood insurance.
Right.
So just be careful. You want to be making sure you know what you're getting yourself into. Another big thing is, to call your insurance agent, your homeowner's insurance agent, and find out what's on your policy. Most people don't really know. What kind of coverage do you have? Do you have flood coverage? Do you not have flood coverage?
It's funny you say that because my wife asked me, do we have flood insurance? And I said, I don't know. We live on a lake and you would think that we should, but I don't think we do. I've assumed it came with it, but it doesn't. That's not automatic, right?
No. So usually you don't have flood insurance unless you're in a floodplain. If you're in a floodplain, then usually your mortgage company is going to require you to get flood insurance as a condition of your mortgage. But if you're not in a floodplain, most people do not have flood insurance. But it's a good thing to know, right? So if you have flood damage, first thing you want to know is, do I have flood insurance? From there, you also want to know, what is my deductible? Sometimes if you have some minor damage, it may not be worth it given what your deductible is to make an insurance claim. So again, you want to be informed about these things before you just call up your insurance company. Because I'll tell you, with the state of homeowners insurance in the state of Florida right now, if you're making a claim, and you don't absolutely need to, it's going to be, when you go to renew your policy, it is going to be more expensive and it is going to be harder to find insurance. I mean, the homeowners insurance market, we've talked about it before, is just terrible. And after this storm, I can only see it getting worse, frankly, especially with what happened in Southwest Florida. So, if you have $5,000 in damage and your deductible's $3,000 or $4,000, maybe it doesn't make sense for you to file that claim.
Because you might not be able to get insurance, or it's going to skyrocket.
It could skyrocket.
Okay.
Yeah, it could typically, your current company may drop you. They can probably find you another policy, but it may be a lot more expensive. I mean, I didn't have any claims. I told you my policy tripled in price. So
it's crazy.
Yeah, and I just put a new roof on the house, but woe is me. So yeah, you just want to be cognizant of those things. Know how much you're gonna have to pay out of pocket. Roofing claims, the deductibles just changed under this new law that was passed in July, I believe it was, of this year. And now basically the deductibles are much higher. They can be 50% of the cost of the roof or 2% of the value of your policy. So, there's no such thing as a free roof. You want to know what you're going to have to pay. So if these people are coming around saying, hey, we can get you a free roof, you need to know what your deductible is on that quote unquote free roof.
Right. Because roofs aren't cheap, like it is as cheap as they used to be, because the cost of supplies and everything are up now too. So, I mean, that 50% is a lot more than it used to be a few years ago.
Yeah. I mean, when we bought our last house in about 2010, 2011, they had just put a new roof on it, and it was $4,000 because I saw the receipt. Okay. And it was what they call like a tar and gravel roof. It wasn't shingles.
Right.
And so we got a quote later on to put a new roof on it, and it was $20,000. Same roof. 10 years later, basically.
Right. Yeah.
And actually another company came out and said, hey, your roof actually has about another 20 years in it. I wouldn't touch it at this point. So there's a few companies that actually said that. So, but the point is, the cost of roofs have gone up a lot.
Yeah.
I guess there's the old adage, you pay for it now or you pay for it later. Maybe all these free roofs we're now paying for later. I don't know.
Yeah.
But just be very careful who you're hiring. Know what you're signing. When they hand you a packet of paperwork, one of the things I always say be careful of is what they call an assignment of benefits, which basically means you're signing over your rights to the contractor to then sue your insurance company. And so part of the new law that was passed was trying to restrict some of those actions where they couldn't get attorney's fees anymore if there was an assignment of benefits.
Right.
But I know that used to be a big problem because basically what would happen is now the contractor or the roofing company or whoever it was would get into a lawsuit with your insurance company basically on your behalf, and you really didn't even know what was going on. And so now, it comes time to renew your policy. It's much harder to get policies if there's outstanding litigation, much harder to get renewals. Your premiums are certainly going to go up. So there can be a lot of problems. You just want to know what you're getting yourself into. And maybe in certain situations, there's a reason to do that. I'm personally not a big fan of assignment of benefits. I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense. Maybe somebody out there disagrees. If you disagree, tell me why. But ultimately, be informed. Know who you're hiring. Are they licensed in the state of Florida? Are they from Michigan or something, and they just came down here for the storm? You want to make sure they actually have a Florida contractor's license. Ask them for that license number and look it up.
That's a good point too, because there are storm chasers, without a doubt. Yeah,
there's storm chasers, and a lot of times they'll try to work under somebody else's license. So you want to they may have a license number, but is that their number? Or, I've seen cases before where they're paying some guy to use his license number. He has no idea what's going on, no involvement in the company, and he's doing it for like 10 different companies. And usually they end up losing their license down the road because people do shady stuff with their license number. But, is that actually somebody who works for the company? Is that their license number? Can you meet them? Can you talk to them? Are they going to be involved in this project, or are they simply just kind of, leasing out their license number? You want to make sure you're hiring somebody who's reputable. So if something goes wrong, I've said this before, law school teaches us to think worst case scenario, right? Mm-hmm. Become very paranoid after law school. What's the worst that's going to happen in this situation? So sure, I'm sure people have hired out-of-state contractors before, people using other people's licenses, and they'll say, yeah, everything was great. Everything went fine. Well, that's great. But if something goes wrong, what happens? Because that person goes back to Michigan or California or wherever they're from, and they disappear. And now you have to try to hunt down, okay, who's responsible? What insurance is applicable? How can I get this fixed? How can I get this resolved? And it can become a big headache when the people you were dealing with ultimately just kind of vanish.
Right. And you said you were with this company out of so-and-so city right here in, Orange County. Wrong. You're from Michigan.
Right. I mean, I've seen, you see a lot of these companies kind of pop up, and they're very generic names, and they're kind of a company associated with a company associated with a company. You can't figure out really who is who. You want a reputable company that's been in town for a while, has some reviews out there. People know who they are. They're licensed, they're insured, they're bonded, they have the appropriate, licensing number. You
Hmm.
can go to the Department of Business and Professional Regulation online. You can look up their license number, see if they have complaints against their license, any regulatory action against their licenses. Um, so that's all very transparent. You want that transparency with anyone you're hiring. And I know a lot of times, people out there are preying on, hey, we want to get this done now, we want to get this done quickly, but do your due diligence. It'll save you a lot of headache in the long run.
Well, that's the thing too, is I have had people that have tried to do like the tree trimming thing, or, we can check your roof for you.
Right.
And then when you do want to do a little bit of research, they get frustrated and annoyed with you. Like, come on, man, like, stop wasting my time. It's like, well, wait, just like you said, if I'm getting elbow surgery, I'm not just going to take the fact that you told me, down at the taco stand that you're a surgeon. I'm going to do some legit research on you. So if you see them, that's probably a big old red flag. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And if they're getting frustrated that you want to do a little research on them, if you're a small business owner or whatever, and you've got great reviews, I'm going to want to brag about those, not have you dig into,
Yeah, I mean, in most situations, you probably wouldn't buy anything unless it was Girl Scout cookies of somebody coming to your door, just knocking on your door and saying,
right.
"Can I help you with this?" In storms, that mentality kind of changes a little bit sometimes, and they're kind of preying on that. But yeah, I mean, years ago, I had a tree company come out, and they quoted me to remove a tree, and then I went and looked them up, and basically every review they had was, these people completely destroyed my yard. They don't know what they're doing. They cracked my driveway. Just horrible review after horrible review after horrible review. Obviously, I didn't hire them, and you don't want to hire somebody like that. You want to know what you're getting yourself into. You want to make sure that you know who you're actually hiring. So just be very careful out there. I think that's probably the biggest piece of advice. At this point in time, as far as legal goes, typically people really don't need a lawyer involved yet. The only time you really need a lawyer involved in these situations is if the insurance company is denying the claim for some reason or refusing to pay fair value for the claim to get your home repaired. And at that point, then you may want to contact a lawyer. We don't do that kind of work in our office, but if you do need someone, we can certainly direct you to them and get you in the right hands. But, this isn't a situation where, hey, you should run out and hire a lawyer for any reason. First, you need to get out there, get a responsible contractor to give you some bids. I always recommend getting 3 quotes if you can.
Mm-hmm.
I know people are busy, so it may be hard to, but try to get 3 quotes for whatever the repair work is. If you want to make the claim to your insurance company, get that set up with them, find out what your deductible is going to be. And then ultimately, if the insurance company is refusing to pay for it or saying, hey, this is not, or trying to pay, pennies on the dollar or something like that, then that's when you want to reach out to an attorney and start talking to them and see if they think that there's possibly a case there to sort of force the insurance company to pay fair value.
And just know that it's okay to put up your guard a little bit. If you got the guy that shows up with the clipboard at your door and says, yeah, we're doing some work down the street for the Johnsons, and they said you might want some done too, it's okay to be leery of that.
I mean, that's always a great pitch. Hey, we're in the neighborhood. We have our crane here already.
Sure. Knock it out while we're here.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I understand why people would fall for that, but just be careful.
Yep,
be careful.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we got a lot of great questions coming up here in just a minute. You are listening to the DeWitt Law Review right here on 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's news and talk. If you do need some legal advice and you want to speak to Mo and his team here, you can always call the office anytime at 1-800-DeWitt Law, or if you want to interact with us on this show right now, the DeWitt Law Review, you can send us an email to ask@dewittlaw.com. Again, it's ask@dewittlaw.com, or you can also call 407-53-MOSES. You can leave a voicemail right there. Then we'll be able to listen to your voicemail, play your voicemail back, and get you some advice. You're listening to the DeWitt Law Review right here on 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's news and talk. Your questions coming up when we return.
I was visiting the local resort when I had an unexpected slip and fall. I reached out to the DeWitt Law Firm and was put in contact with Philip Wayne. Initially, the insurance company offered me a low-ball amount, and I was able to secure over 10 times that amount from Philip Wayne and the DeWitt Law Firm. I'd like to thank them for all their hard work and recommend them to anyone who's looking to have an attorney. If you're injured on the go, just call Mo.
Hey, welcome back to the DeWitt Law Review right here on 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's News and Talk. My name is Jay Edwards here with Mo DeWitt of the DeWitt Law Firm. We're taking your calls, your questions, your answers, trying to give you the best legal advice here with Mo DeWitt. And you can send us those questions to ask@dewittlaw.com or by calling and leaving a voicemail at 407-53-MOSES, and we'll get to your voicemails and your emails and get you some legal advice here from Mo DeWitt. Mo, somebody wants to know about the Hurricane Ian, if their car got struck or damaged during that, and they go and they file a claim. This was a windshield broken plus damage to the car. Is that two separate claims because it is a windshield and like insurance companies have to cover the windshield? And can your insurance go up because it wasn't caused by like a traffic accident or fault or anything like that?
So typically, if a tree falls on a vehicle like this, hopefully no one was in the vehicle. I assume they weren't. But typically you're just going to make a normal claim with the insurance, letting them know, hey, the car's been damaged. They'll come out and take a look at it and either repair it or declare it a total loss. Now, typically in Florida, if you're not at fault for the accident, unless you have a certain amount of accidents within a certain period of time, I think it's either 3 within 3 years or 3 within 5 years. I forget off the top of my head.
Okay.
They can't raise your insurance rates.
Oh, that's good to know.
So, as long as you don't have a bunch of claims, if this is, once every 3 or 5 years, then you should be perfectly fine to go ahead, make the claim, get it repaired, or if it's a total loss, and then they shouldn't be able to increase your rates.
Man, that would be terrible if just Mother Nature, and the next thing you know, your
Mother
insurance
Nature
goes,
gotcha.
Yeah, just because of that. All right, got a question here. Let's see. Hey, Mo, simple, quick question.
It's never a simple quick
Right,
question.
I know.
Whenever you start with that, I know we're going downhill.
All right, filed a claim against my home insurance for my roof. I hired a lawyer, signed a contract with him to represent me in my claim. The home insurance company went bankrupt, and my case went to FIGA, F-I-G-A?
Yeah, Florida Insurance Guarantee Association, I believe that stands for.
Okay. Does my contract with my lawyer still uphold or is it terminated? I asked because he wants me to sign a new contract with his new fees to fight FIGA. And if I don't sign it, he will charge me his out-of-pocket expense because I am, quote, terminating the prior contract.
So it obviously depends what the contract states. Now, typically when you hire a lawyer on a contingency fee basis, and they do work for you, you can always switch attorneys or fire that attorney, but they could have a lien on the file, meaning they get paid for the work that they did, once your new attorney collects or something along those lines. In this case, again, this isn't my area of work that I do, but in this case, it sounds like he's probably trying to get her or him to sign a new contract out of an abundance of caution, right? So FIGA has basically stepped into the shoes of the prior insurance company. So, you're really kind of still suing the same entity. It's under the same cause of action. It's just a new defendant because FIGA's taken over essentially. Okay. So I don't know if the actual terms of the contract have changed. If they're trying to change the terms of the contract, meaning changing the percentages, changing whatever it may be, that's a conversation you want to have with the attorney and ask, hey, what's going on here? Again, not my area of expertise by any means, but maybe FIGA is much more difficult to deal with. Maybe they're limited on the amount they're allowed to pay on claims. So maybe that's going to affect the claim and affect the attorney's compensation. So they're trying to adjust for that. So I think in these kinds of situations, you always just want to sit down with the attorney and say, hey, what's going on here? Explain it to me. There may be a very valid and simple explanation for it. Or maybe the attorney didn't like the first contract they signed and now they're trying to change it.
Why did I sign that one?
So you just want to be informed. But obviously this is a situation where the insurance company they were suing previously went under. Now FIGA has basically stepped in as their guarantor,
right? And
now you're going after them to try to pay the claim essentially.
Okay, so just have a conversation.
I think that's the place to start. You also want to look at the terms of the prior contract.
Okay,
see what it says. Does it allow for a lien? Does it actually terminate if the defendant's changed? Contracts are all based on the terms. Mm-hmm. So like typically, when we do a contract for an injury case, for instance, it'll be, so-and-so defendant, John Smith or any other entity that's responsible for the damages. And so that would kind of cover if down the road we see somebody else, we can sue them on their behalf as well or go after them and try to make a recovery for the person.
Makes sense. Kind of a little umbrella there.
Exactly. Because when you sign up a case, a lot of times you don't actually know who's at fault yet. You have to do an investigation to figure that out.
Gotcha. Makes total sense. All right. Well, hopefully that answers your question. And we've got more of your questions coming up in just a few minutes. You're listening to the DeWitt Law Review right here on 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's News and Talk. Welcome back to the DeWitt Law Review on 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's News and Talk. My name is Jay Edwards here with Mo DeWitt of the DeWitt Law Firm, getting to your questions. And if you've got one yourself, you need some legal advice, you can send your email to ask@dewittlaw.com, or you can call and leave a voicemail at 407-53-MOSES. Every Sunday morning, you'll learn how Florida's legal issues affect you with your host, Mo DeWitt of the DeWitt Law Firm. All right, Mo, here we go. Let's get to some questions. It says, hi, Mo. Hope you're doing well. Stayed safe in the storm. Former client of yours from 2019. Really had a great experience working with you. I have some questions about a case I'd like to open against my apartment complex for gross negligence because it flooded and ruined hundreds of lives, totaled personal belongings and cars, including mine, and they're trying to break our lease and kick us out without giving us any money or anywhere to go. And I can prove it. One, they said that they knew this would happen because there's a photographic evidence of an article published by the paper dating back to September 2017 of the exact same thing happening. And two, they did not send a single warning until 1:14 p.m. that there was flooding. And I have a photo of the road at 1:15 showing it was already above the hood of most of the cars with no alternate way out. Can you lend some advice? Thank you, Mo.
So a lot going on there, obviously. So in the immediate future, you have to deal with the lease. And so, if the property is no longer habitable, if you can't live there anymore because of the flooding, obviously you need to move out, vacate, salvage whatever property you can, and find a new place to live, essentially. Now, when you do that, the apartment complex may try to get you to sign documents. You want to be very cautious about what you sign as far as releases go, because a lot of these complexes will try to get you to sign a release saying you're not going to sue them for any damage to your property or anything else. And so in this case, the big issue is that they knew of the flooding. They knew that there was an issue here. They didn't disclose possibly that, hey, maybe you need to get flood insurance, or things like that. So that, I'm not saying that there's definitely a case, but it's something that you want to look into before you sign any sort of release waiving your ability to go after them. Now, given that the property is no longer habitable, they basically have to let you out of the lease. They can't try to hold you to the lease when they don't have a safe place for you to lease.
Right. Okay.
So, number one, you got to find a new place to live, get your stuff out of there, salvage what you can, document any damage to the best of your ability, take lots of photos. If you can, inventory and document any of your property that's been damaged or destroyed by the flooding. And then, you can take a look and see, okay, did this apartment complex know of the flooding? Did they fail to disclose it? Did they fail to have proper drainage or install proper drainage to make sure that people's apartments aren't going to flood? So that's kind of what you need to look at. And then ultimately, down the road, you can contact an attorney to start investigating that claim and see if you have a potential claim against the apartment complex there.
So if you have like renter's insurance, that, because I remember when we were talking to FEMA on there, and FEMA was saying you contact your insurance company first, and then things that aren't covered by your insurance company, that's where FEMA steps in. So when you're living in an apartment, you don't necessarily own, obviously, that unit. So a lot of people do have renter's insurance. Is that where that will come into play first, or do you go after the apartment complex and their insurance?
So typically you're going to go to your insurance company first for any of the items that are damaged within the apartment if you have renter's insurance. Okay. From there, the insurance company, the renter's insurance company, may have a subrogation interest back against the apartment complex if they feel that the apartment complex is at fault. And then the insurance company will actually sue the apartment complex kind of on your behalf.
Okay.
If you don't have renter's insurance, that's obviously a different story. And then you just have to go directly to the apartment complex to try to recover your damages. But you're also probably going to have damages for, having to move right away, moving costs, down payments, things like that. So there's going to be a lot to deal with. And it's going to be financially taxing up front, where you got to get a place to live right away. You got to come up with a down payment. Some of these apartment complexes will try to not give you your down payments back, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
All that kind of stuff that you have to deal with. It's a giant headache. We've dealt with it a lot before with mold cases and things like that. And, a lot of these apartment complexes are owned by national companies. I'm not saying anything bad about them, but sometimes it's just hard to even get somebody to who actually has any sort of knowledge or authority to get them on the line
Right.
to get the situation straightened out.
So what happens in the case where, and this is Steve's question, and I'm asking a whole bunch of extra questions for Steve, just because I'm curious. I mean, so he's talking about the cars that they looked down, they were warned people that, that the flooding was coming. Meanwhile, the water's already halfway up the cars. What happens in the car situation? Is that a car insurance thing? Is that a renter's insurance thing? Or is that the apartment complex's insurance?
So that would be your car insurance first.
Okay.
You would go through them. And then again, if the car insurance company, or if the car insurance company felt that they had a cause of action against the apartment complex, they could take those subrogation rights and then sue the apartment complex. If you don't have insurance, then you may have to go after the apartment complex.
Okay.
Now, there is going to be a different standard for probably flooding in a parking lot versus flooding in an apartment unit. And it's also going to depend on the knowledge. Now, a warning after the cars are halfway underwater is a little too late, obviously.
Right.
But it sounds like this has been an ongoing issue, and maybe there was not proper drainage installed or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen those kinds of cases before, obviously, where, hey, the apartment complex was trying to save money. They didn't want to put in this drainage, but they knew ultimately that, flooding was inevitable. It was just a matter of time. Now, the apartment complex, their defense could, of course, be, we've never seen a storm that dumps this much water. So it's going to really kind of come down to a factual determination too,
Yeah, we weren't expecting this kind of storm.
Right. But if they were getting flooding before from just, little thunderstorms and they didn't fix it, then they may be on the hook for something like this.
All right, let's get to, I think this might be a quick one. I don't know. We'll see. This comes from Aaron. I have a company that owes me money, refusing to pay. They're based out of Missouri. Is that something that you can help with? Is it easy to go for after somebody out of state?
Well, the first thing you have to do is see who has jurisdiction. So if there's a contract, typically the contract states where the lawsuit has to be brought. So if the company in Missouri drafted the contract may say that you have to bring the lawsuit in Missouri. And so you may have to hire an attorney in Missouri. So that's the first thing to check is, where do you have to bring the lawsuit? Is it Florida or is it Missouri? It depends who's going to have jurisdiction, and usually that's determined based on the terms of the contract.
Okay. So that was a fair, look at that.
I spoke fast.
All right. Lisa wants to know, hey, Mo, question. If a person went through a divorce and opposing attorney lied to the magistrate about us exchanging evidence, none given to court but was shared, might there be a case against the attorney for lying to the magistrate?
So a lot to unpack there, but so if there was ever a misrepresentation made in court, it does open, whatever order or judgment was entered to be reheard or possibly set aside, but you only have a limited time frame to do that. So typically on a rehearing, it's 14 days. For set aside, it usually has to be brought within a year unless it was evidence that you weren't able to discover, and then you kind of have a longer time period. But usually kind of the general rule is within a year. So if there was a misrepresentation made, whether it was deliberate or not, you could go and try to set aside or correct whatever order was entered based on the incorrect information. Now, typically in court, when attorneys are making arguments on behalf of their clients, typically there's what we call litigation privilege, which means basically as long as they have a good faith basis, based on the information their client's giving them, they can't really be sued. And the reason for that is obviously, when we're in court, I have to rely on what my client tells me unless there's something that I can blatantly see that goes against what he or she is saying. Here, I mean, I'm not really exactly sure about the exchange of information or what the factual details are. Typically the appropriate remedy, if something is misstated in court or information is presented that later turns out not to be true or whatever it may be, the appropriate remedy is to try to set aside whatever order was entered based on that information, because the court ultimately wants to get it right, but they're making a decision based on the facts that are presented to them. So the facts turn out not to be true for whatever reason, or certain evidence comes out later on. We see this, in murder cases with DNA all the time, right? So they get the DNA evidence later on, and ultimately those convictions are overturned because now they have new evidence. Same thing here. If there's new evidence in civil cases, it's, like I said, a much shorter time frame than a criminal murder case. But if new evidence comes up that kind of opens up the case and says, hey, this was done improperly, the information we had at the time was wrong or improper, then the judge, in certain situations within a certain time frame, may be able to overturn or set aside those orders.
Well, I mean, just as much as a client wants to and needs to be able to trust their attorney, their lawyer, um, it goes both ways too. You as an attorney have to be able to trust your client that they've told you everything. I mean, I can only imagine how many times that you might be in court and all of a sudden you're like, it really would have been nice if you would have told me that before. You know, I'm sure that happens to people all the time.
It definitely happens all the time. Now, the other issue here is, they're talking about something about exchanging evidence, that the other attorney said that the evidence was exchanged. This person saying it wasn't exchanged. Now, you may also need to have spoken up at that time, right? So if typically both sides are given an opportunity to speak,
right?
If they didn't bring that up at the time, they may have waived the issue. So that's where, and I'm kind of guessing this person didn't have an attorney, that they were representing themselves just based on the question, but
right.
That's where really having an attorney can be valuable, because you want to make sure that your attorney's properly objecting to preserve the record. So if there is an appeal, those issues are preserved. And a lot of times, if you don't bring something up during the trial, essentially, you can't bring it up later.
Speak now or forever hold your peace, that kind of thing.
Exactly, because what they don't want to happen is you deliberately not say anything only to basically try to get the case overturned later or try to bring it up on appeal, because courts ultimately want finality. There's a reason they say you get your day in court, right? Because typically that's kind of your final day in court. Now, there is the appeals process and things like that. But, that's really where everything is supposed to be presented. And except in the very limited case of where something turns out to be, fraudulent, deliberately or just, by mishap, that's kind of a very limited circumstance. And, I don't recommend people try to overturn orders typically, unless there's really powerful evidence. It's typically a very tough standard to overcome, essentially.
Gotcha. All right. We got a couple of minutes left here. Let's try and get to this one real quick if we can. If not, we can continue it. But
Sure.
Says, hey, Mo, hope your family doing well after the storm. My mom had purchased some property with her ex. It wasn't a husband, just her ex. After her brain surgery, he took off to Michigan. She can't live there anymore and wants to sell the property. He's given her a hard time. She was looking into getting a lawyer. I know that this might not necessarily be your thing, but is there somebody that you can recommend? Can she get out of this? Can she do that?
So typically you're gonna have to file what's called a partition action, which basically forces the sale of the property. So if you own any sort of property with another person and you want to sell, except in the case where you're married, and you want to sell it, you basically have to file a partition action. It ultimately kind of forces the sale of the property. And then, of course, there's the issue of how the proceeds are distributed. If someone put more money into the home or something along those lines, then you have to basically prove that. There's kind of the presumption that you start where the proceeds are going to be split equally after all debts are paid off,
right,
and real estate costs and all that kind of stuff, brokerage fees. But yeah, I mean, basically you have to file a partition action. It's a lawsuit. You have to have the other side served with it. And once you kind of start that process, unless the other side wants to buy you out and buy the property from you at an agreed upon price, typically it's going to be sold. So that's, it's going to get sold one way or another.
So that doesn't necessarily give that other person an option. Once you bring that against them, you pretty much have to sell unless you.
Yeah, there's really no defense to sell it unless you're going to buy them out. So in this case, if she wants to file the partition action against the ex-boyfriend or whoever he is, and then she, can make him an offer as part of the partition action and basically end the partition action and buy out his interest. And it's just going to come down to what the amount is. Gotcha. Otherwise, it'll be sold and the proceeds will be divvied up.
Interesting. All right. And then, so if somebody has paid the taxes on it for the last 10 years and they're the ones that put in the pool, they'll start looking at that kind of stuff. And that person's probably going to get a little bit more, obviously.
They can. And it depends on the circumstances of the situation. Was it an investment property? Were you guys living there at the time? Because obviously those are different standards if you're getting the benefit of living in the property. And that's where those cases become a little messy, is, figuring out what credits or debits, so to speak, are applicable, right, which ones aren't, and kind of ultimately what's the, who's getting what at the end of the day. It's kind of like a mini divorce over a piece of property.
Over land. Yeah. Okay, gotcha. All right, Mo, if people want to get in touch with you, if they need to seek out some of your help or some of your team's help, what's the best way to do that in addition to just what we do here on Sundays?
Well, you can always go to DeWittLaw.com. You can email us if you just have a little legal question to ask, ask@DeWittLaw.com. That's where all these great questions come from. Or if you want to talk to us, want to set up a consultation during the week, you can give us a call, 1-800-DeWitt-Law. It's 1-800-339-4885. We do have people available 24 hours a day. Of course, I'm not actually answering the phone 24 hours a day because I do need to sleep sometimes. But if you want to call and set up a consultation anytime, there are people standing by who can do that for you. And, mostly we talk about all sorts of stuff on this show, obviously,
Right.
but mostly, we're dealing with, divorce, family law, and injury cases here. But if you do need something else, we're happy to try to point you in the right direction. Give us a call, shoot us an email, and we'll try to help you the best we can.
Perfect. All right. We'll get to another one of those questions coming up in just a few minutes. Also, we've got our Mo Pro Tip of the Week. You're listening to the DeWitt Law Review on 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's News and Talk.
About a year ago, I was in a really bad accident. I got my hand caught in a saw and I lost my thumb. Luckily, the doctors were able to put everything back together. Originally, we reached out to other firms to take my case and nobody would help us. But when we called Mr. DeWitt and his team, they were there to help through the whole thing. I'm extremely happy with the result. Extremely happy with the result. It was an easy process. They made it as easy as possible, and we got the best possible result. Injured on the go? Just call Mo.
Hey, welcome back. You're listening to the DeWitt Law Review on 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's News and Talk. My name is Jay Edwards here with Mo DeWitt of the DeWitt Law Firm. And every Sunday morning right here at 10 a.m., that's when you'll learn how Florida's legal issues affect you with your host, Mo DeWitt of the DeWitt Law Firm. You got a question? You want one for next week? Get in those emails to us, ask@dewittlaw.com, or you can also call and leave a voicemail, 407-53-MOSES. Let's go ahead and get to a question here from Stephen. Hey, Mo. I hope you're well. My wife and I have almost everything paid off with the exception of our home. We would like to get something set up in case something happens to one of us or both. We would like our nephew to have everything in that scenario. What is the best, easiest way to have this done? From what I've heard, a living trust is best. How could we go about getting this done? I also have a truck and a boat in my name only. And how would I like to make sure that there's no issues with those material things?
So, certainly, estate planning is not my area of expertise, but obviously you want to get a will done here, possibly with a trust, depending on your assets. So,
Okay.
I really recommend sitting down with an estate planning attorney. If you need a recommendation, I'm happy to give you some names. But sitting down with them so they can kind of review your comprehensive estate plan and make sure that everything is essentially covered. Now, in this situation, if you want to go to your nephew, you definitely want to make sure that there's a will in place. Because otherwise it's going to pass pursuant to Florida statute. Basically, it's going to go to your heirs pursuant to Florida statute, and your nephew may or may not, depending on what your family tree looks like, end up with what you want him to end up with.
Gotcha.
So definitely sit down with an estate planning attorney. Make sure you get a will and estate plan done. It's never fun. Nobody ever wants to do it, but it's something that you should do.
So I guess in that situation, say this couple here, they had a son or daughter they no longer talk to her or whatever, and the nephew's there and they plan on everything going to the nephew. Something happens to them, they're going to go follow that family tree and find that son or daughter first.
Typically. And in some cases you actually can't write certain family members out of a will and it's usually dealing with minor children and spouses and things like that, because the state doesn't want them to become wards of the state, meaning that they're basically dependent on state assistance. So
Right.
if there's assets, they want to make sure that those people are protected. Again, estate planning attorney knows a lot more about that than I do. But yeah, otherwise it's going to go basically to your immediate heirs and then kind of down your family tree.
Okay.
As they told us in law school, per stirpes, which basically just means down your family tree in equal portions until they get everything distributed appropriately.
Gotcha. All right. There you go, Stephen. Hopefully that helps you. Let's go ahead and get to our Mo Pro Tip of the Week. What do you have for us, Mo?
Well, I'm just going to kind of, go back to what we started at the beginning of the show with is, after the hurricane, just make sure you're being smart. Watch out for those consumer scams out there. They're already talking about them on the news. Anybody who comes to your door, knocks on your door, just be very, very cautious of who you're hiring. When you do hire somebody, make sure everything's in writing. Really review those contracts. Make sure the scope of work is in there and that it's detailed. Because, if you've ever done construction before, anytime you want to add something on later, it becomes much more expensive than
change order.
Good old change orders. So just make sure you're reviewing those contracts, that they are clear as to what is covered. Remember, whatever the salesperson tells you, or whoever you're talking to tells you, doesn't matter unless it's in the contract. If there's a legal dispute, it's going to come down to what is in that contract. That's what the court's going to be looking at. And if he says, oh yeah, we're going to, put a new roof on your house, but the contract says they're just doing shingle repair, then ultimately the shingle repair is what's going to be be upheld because that's what's in the contract. Beyond that, get copies of your insurance policies. Make sure you're reviewing those policies. Be familiar with what the terms are, the deductibles, any exclusions or provisions. Talk to the insurance agent. Get all that information kind of right away, frankly, if you have damage. You want to know what are you on the hook for and what's going to be covered.
Right.
And then, you have to keep track of all this stuff. So keep track of what the damages are. Take lots of photos. If you didn't do it, for people out there should be aware, before the storm, go outside and snap some photos of your property so you can show the before pictures, essentially.
Right, yeah.
Show that damage didn't pre-exist the storm. Obviously, right now it's a little late for that, but in the future, certainly do that. But now after the storm, make sure you're documenting everything as much as possible. Now with cell phones, obviously, pretty easy to take video and photographic evidence. Make sure you're doing that, and make sure you're inventorying property that's been damaged. Take pictures of it, keep a spreadsheet of it, and just really kind of try to keep everything as organized as possible. I know when you're living in a state of chaos, it becomes pretty difficult to do that, but it'll make the claims process much easier down the road.
There you go. It's a Mo Pro Tip of the Week. We'll be back again next Sunday at 10 a.m. You are listening to the DeWitt Law Review on 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's News and Talk.
I had stopped, and for some reason I look up and I see the headlights coming up, and I knew he wasn't going to stop. I'm just sitting there bracing for it, and sure enough, bam. And a couple days later, I woke up and said, oh no, my neck was hurting, back is hurting. And I felt hopeless. I didn't know what to do because I thought it was over. Maybe in that moment, was I supposed to call someone? At this point, is it too late? And I went on the internet. First thing that pops up is DeWitt. And I said, okay, I'll give him a call. We'll see what happens. I don't know about lawyers because I was the same person. I was afraid of it, to be honest. I thought maybe I'd have to pay them if I lost. I just didn't know how it worked. I think the biggest thing that I can say that DeWitt helped me with was holding my hand through the process of treatment. They actually were able to refer doctors to go to. I got help with my MRIs, with all the scans we had to do on the neck. So there was so much that goes into a car crash process that I truly just didn't know. If you've been hit, call. Simple as that. Because you don't have to do it alone. There's people like the DeWitt Law Firm that will help you. If you're injured on the go, just call Mo.